Um, but sister's picked up. Everybody's home. It's late here, almost 11, and I'm tired. But I do want to finish this, and this is a good little chapter, a little good little section. So I'm excited to continue. So let us continue. Outside of Western civilization, we can find many examples of non-patriarchal societies. Some stateless societies intentionally preserve gender fluidity, like the Mabuti described previously. That's what they were talking about in the last section in this section about um, naturally natural competition. About isn't oh yeah, aren't people naturally competitive? And they showed how no, people are not. And or rather it's pretty much a result of the environment, the culture that you establish for your organization or for your culture, your civilization, right? And the Mabuti, many other hunter-gatherer cultures, they specifically did not want to create a competitive environment. They in fact encouraged cooperative environments instead. So, yeah, that was great. But let's continue this. Many societies accept fixed genders and division of roles between men and women, but seek to preserve equality between these roles. Exactly, right? It's like I stated this before. Is many societies have gender roles, but they're more so patterns rather than expectations, right? You're not just because you fall into a certain gender role doesn't mean you have to do that. Like if the community needs something else, or if you want to do something else, you can switch up, right? These are patterns, not expectations. These are roles, not like hard cast duties or identities. um, Several of these societies allow transgender expressions, individuals changing their gender or adopting a unique gender identity. In hunter gatherer societies, a sharp and hard division of labor between the sexes is not universal. And in the case of one particular society, virtually every subsistence activity can be and often is performed by either men or women. In fact, it has been a recent study that shows that's kind of a meta analysis on all these different hunter gatherer cultures. And it showed that even like the idea of there being a sharp division um, between labor is not as clear cut as we thought. Right? It turns out a lot of the what we thought was a clear division was really a kind of bias. It was a measurement bias of what researchers thought was the proper way of doing things, and so they kind of fudged the data a little bit. But that meta-analysis showed um, a much better thing there. I might be able to think I have it actually here with my tabs, y'all, on my links. Um, I save a lot of stuff on here. Where is it? Because I want to show this. This is a great study. Yeah. So this is one of them. This one's talking about how um, these hunter gatherers, like the idea of the man, the hunter, is kind of is wrong. So you can look this up yourself. Vivek Venkataraman, the conversation. Um, there was another one though. That was a meta-analysis. Did I save it on Pocket, or might have saved it on another platform? Oh yeah, here we go. Hunting and gathering. So I'm not going to go through this one because it's super long. Like 36-minute read. Um, but yeah, you can look this one up. Hunter gathering uh, on anthroencyclopedia.com. So look that up if you don't believe me. You can find this information yourself. It's extremely interesting. What you learn if you when you research hunter gatherer cultures, and because that was human life for hundreds of thousands of years. I've made several videos about this on my YouTube, but it's absolutely fascinating that human civilization, right, has history that is 150,000 to 200,000 years old with these hunter gatherer societies, right? And they were sustainable. They were so sustainable that that's what we did for a long period of time, right? And people look at them like, oh, they didn't do nothing, they were miserable. Like, no, they were extremely, like, this is how we became, one of the most populous and one of the most quote unquote apex predator of the world, right? Is through these hunter gatherer societies, not through the colonization of agriculture. That kind of stemmed into that turned our sustainable, um, place. I'm not even going to say at the top of the food chain, because it wasn't like that. It's more so our sustainable niche, in the world, as adapting to different environments and everything like that. It turned it into a colonization, right? Into a almost like a cancer of the world, where we began to just eat, consume, consume, grow, 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 at the cost of every other ecosystem around us. Um, and that's concerning, because 10,000 years, basically, that's our current history of a Neolithic period of agriculture, is roughly 10,000 years compared to 200,000 years. So it's a huge fraction, right? Or rather, it's a small fraction compared to our whole history. But the last 10,000 years, ever since we created agriculture, it's kind of been sliding downhill in terms of balance with society. And of course, it's not just agriculture itself. It's like evil or something like that. It's the fact that over a span of a couple hundreds of thousand years, agriculture creates more and more inequality, and it creates more and more distance from the ecosystem, so that people. I'm not going to get into all that, because it's supposed to be short. You can watch my YouTube videos if you're really interested on what I have to say about all that other stuff, but or my podcast, or read my newsletter. But anyways, let's continue. Where were we? Yeah. So the Igbo of Western Africa have separate spheres of activity for men and women. Women were responsible for certain economic tasks, and men for others. And each group held power autonomously over their sphere. These spheres designated who produced which goods, domesticated which animals, and took which responsibilities in the garden and market. If a man interfered in a woman's sphere of activity or abused his wife, the woman had a ritual of collective solidarity that preserved the balance and punished the offender, called sitting on a man. Ooh, I'm not gonna lie, that sounds a little kinky. But that's interesting. That's interesting. Because that's kind of back to where I was saying, many of these societies had ways to enforce and encourage equality, egalitarianism. And I find that amazing. All the women would assemble outside the man's house, yelling at him and insulting him in order to cause him shame. This is a huge thing. So people all the time talk about cancel culture. It's the bane of humanity, or whatever, right? Say all this one stuff. Say all this stuff about cancel culture. This is humans. This is what we do best. Is shame. Shame is one of the best ways at encouraging, or rather discouraging, bad behavior. And you might say what you want about, this, that, the other, but actually cancel culture or shame is actually one of the best methods of behavior, of societal, behavior, kind of influence. The reason why I say that is because cancel culture, or rather shame, in and of itself, is extremely powerful, but also extremely egalitarian, right? Because shame does not require, and should not, have, should not mandate people having power, right, to do something to you, to like take away your things or whatever. It's just social encouragement, right? It's just social behavior. We are extremely social animals, social creatures, and shame is an incredibly efficient way of getting people to do the right things and getting people to feel bad about the wrong things without all this problems of punishment. And I say that because we've taken this idea of punishing people for their crimes or for this, that, and the other, and we've used that as an excuse to dehumanize people, right? This is where the idea of good and evil comes from, in that this puritanistic idea of like, oh, this person did a crime, therefore they should be punished. They did a sin, therefore they should be, whipped and chained and stoned to death and all this other. That's inhumane. That's disgusting, right? Shame, on the other hand, doesn't require that. You don't hear these. They're not throwing stones at them. They're not, and maybe they might come to that later. But most, to my understanding, most societies didn't actually come to blows, right? They use verbal shaming. Like, this is a bad thing, right? And the most they would usually do is ostracization. They will ostracize, the person from the community. So all of this is kind of a non-violent, or at least a non-physically violent, um, way of handling these sorts of things. And it was more humane because when you feel shame, right, it becomes it's encouragement of empathy, right? You only feel shame when you have some sort of empathy for other people, and you have that empathy for other people when you're in a community. When you're in a community where you are engaging with everyone, you know everyone, where you actually trust everyone on a regular basis, right? When you're in that community and people shame, it's like your brother shaming, your sister shaming you if you're close, um, you feel bad because, like, oh man, I respect these people, I trust these people, and they're like, they're saying I did something bad. And so you have a natural inclination to kind of self-reflect, to self-assess, right? The problem with cancel culture is not in and of itself the canceling. It's the fact that, number one, we live in a world where people aren't really in a community, where it's a whole bunch of strangers, right? So you don't actually trust, or you don't respect, you don't really know the people who are shaming you. And so it's harder for you to build that empathy. And number two is the lack of, or rather, the use of power structures, right? And this is the biggest problem. Um, is like when a certain people can get fired or all this other stuff, um, as a part of that canceling. And because of that, they usually dig in, right? They dig in their heels into the wrongs that they did, and they go find some radicalized group, some radical extremist group to, be with, right? Because again, they weren't in a system, in a community, right, where they actually understood that these people trusted you and you respected you and were looking out for the best of you, and then you turned around and did this, and you understood, I'm like, oh man, I shouldn't have done that, right? Instead, when you cancel culture people, and you kind of you get them fired and all this other stuff, a large amount of times they don't learn, they just dig in their heels. And so I went, down a tangent with that, but yeah, I like this idea of shame, but we have to do it better in current, culture. The problem is not the cancel culture. The problem is the fact that people aren't connected, right? They didn't build that community, and they're using power structures. But anyways, let's continue this. If he did not come out to apologize, the mob of women might destroy the fence around his house and his outlying storage buildings. If his offense were grievous enough, the women might even storm into his house, drag him out, and beat him up. There you go. There you go. So yeah, so it does resort to violence, but you see, it's kind of the last resort, right? They don't throw him into jail. They don't put the fire squad him and try to kill him. That's kind of like afterwards. Like, if he's really, really against, that. And to me, that kind of speaks to this. The fact, like I said earlier, you need that empathy, right? And if you don't feel that empathy, then you get the right, you get the beat up, and that builds humility. When you get beat up by a bunch of women, by a bunch of other folks that you deem, worse or whatever, because if you're abusing women, it's probably because you don't respect them, right? And so a whole bunch of women team up and beat your ass, like, you're gonna get a little humbled. So that's very interesting. But again, it's I would be curious to see what this looks like in person, because I would be willing to bet that it doesn't get excessive. I'll be willing to bet that they don't stone them to death or some other type of thing, because they still live in the community, right? They have to deal with this person afterwards. That's a huge part of these 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 um these civilizations, is that they were made of small communities where they valued every single individual. So when somebody did something wrong, they didn't just cast them aside. They try to figure out what to do to fix the situation, right? If they had to beat them, they beat them, but it wasn't excessive, right? It wasn't excessive. And so that person will learn, or that person would recover or whatever, right? It's not some lifelong problem or mistake or vengeance or something like that. And I think that's important as well. I'll be willing. I might be wrong on that. I might be wrong on that, but I'm willing to. I'd be interested to see that. When the British colonized the Igbo, they recognized men's institutions and economic roles, but ignored or were blind to the corresponding women's sphere of social life. See, looking at one part of the system but not seeing the other. And then when Igbo women responded to British indecency with the traditional practice of sitting on a man, the British, possibly mistaking it for women's insurrection, wow, opened fire, putting an end to the gender balancing ritual and cementing the institution of patriarchy in the society they had colonized. There you go. There you go. That's so unfortunate there. I don't think anybody's in the chat, but let me just keep it open just in case. Um, that's sad. It's terrible. Like, you don't need to say anything on that. Like, that's kind of stands for itself right there. The Hadanasane. How in the world do you pronounce that? Hodinoshine. Hodinoshoni. Hodinoshini. The Hodinoshini. Wait, Hodinoshoni, because it's the accent. So I guess Hodinoshoni. 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 I don't know. Called the Iroquois by Europeans, are a matrilineal egalitarian society of Western North America. They traditionally use several means to balance gender relations, whereas European civilization utilizes gender division to socialize people into rigid roles and to oppress women, queer, and transgender people. The gender division of labor and social roles among the Haudenosaunee functions to preserve a balance, assigning each group autonomous niches and powers, and allowing a greater degree of movement between genders than is considered possible in Western society. For hundreds of years, the Haudenosaunee have coordinated between multiple nations using a federative structure. That's beautiful. And at each level of organization, there were women's councils and men's councils. At what might be called the national level, which concerned itself with matters of war and peace, the men's council made the decisions, though the women held a veto power. At the local level, women held more influence. The basic socio-economic unit, the longhouse, was considered to belong to the women, and men had no counsel at this level. When a man married a woman, he moved into her house. Any man who did not behave could ultimately be kicked out of the longhouse by the women. That's another thing too. A lot of these cultures were matrilineal, meaning the men went live with the women, and because of that, right, the women inherently had more power and more protection because they could depend upon their family to protect them in these sorts of things, like that sitting on the man type of situation. Versus when women go to live with the men in a patrilineal society, that leaves a huge amount of abuse because not only is the women not safe, like if something happens, like usually the family's going to side with the man, right? um, but it also creates a situation where the woman becomes nothing more than a reproductive organ, right? They're just there to make the children and to raise the children. Versus in a matrilineal society, because you're surrounded by a whole bunch of other women or the women's family, right? The children are raised by the entire women's family, right? And so the women, that frees the women up to doing all these other things that they want to do. And it's a simple thing, but it's like something most of us don't even think about. But it plays a huge role in that that equality, that egalitarianism. Western society typically sees the higher levels of organization as being more important and powerful. Even the language we use reflects this. But because the Haudenosaunee were egalitarian and decentralized, the lower or local levels of organization where the women had more influence are more important to daily life. In fact, when there was no feud between the different nations, the highest council might go a long time without meeting at all. However, theirs was not a matriarchal society. Men were not exploited or devalued the way women are in patriarchal societies. Rather, each group had a measure of autonomy and means for preserving a balance. Beautiful. Despite centuries of colonization by a patriarchal culture, many groups of Haudenosaunee retain their traditional gender relations and still stand out in stark contrast to the gender oppressive culture of Canada and the United States. That's amazing. Absolutely beautiful section here. I kind of want to continue, but I am quite tired, and I want to have this energy levels up for this next. This is a long one too. So yeah, that was great, and I hope you learned something today. Probably gonna post this up on my YouTube, and next time I do this, definitely gonna share the link out and try to get some engagement going on in here. And yeah, this is nice. I like doing this because I kind of see this. The goal for this is to become something where people are learning together, where we're all learning about these cultures and these ideas and all this other stuff. Oops, sorry. Um, and hopefully we can create a community of people who are interested in learning more and delving into history, anthropology, all these other aspects, and being educated about what we're doing here, and how we can build a better world. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. And as always, thanks for watching and have a great day. See ya. Bye bye.